We are ready. Yes. All right. Welcome to the Science Fiction Writers Panel. I am going to be moderating because I'm not a science fiction writer. My name is Toni Weisskopf. I'm the publisher of Baen Books, and I have had variously the pleasure of publishing the works of all of these gentlemen here. And when I say gentlemen, I do use the term loosely. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is going to be especially Rob this time. I will remind everybody that this is not the Bad Scientist panel at LibertyCon, that we are at the Interstellar Research Group workshop meeting, and we're going to try to, no, I'm lying. We're just going to have fun. One of the things that I'd like everybody to do as we kick this off is explain why they are here, both as a science fiction writer and as someone who is interested in interstellar research. And I'll start that off. I didn't come to work at Baen accidentally. I came from a science family. My great uncle, Vicky Weisskopf, was involved on the Manhattan Project. My dad, Martin Weisskopf, was the project scientist for the X-ray telescope Chandra. And because that wasn't enough, when he was in his late 70s, he also got up IXPE, another X-ray telescope. So I was raised in a family that was interested in physics, and I was raised in a family that was interested in science fiction. I think that both of those things are important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that. But let us start with our troublemaker, Rob Hampson. Why are you here at the IRG?
I have to turn the microphone on, apparently. So I'm here because I don't know how to turn on microphones. I became a scientist because of science fiction. Y'all have a book in your swag bag that kind of tells the story of how I became a scientist, because I was inspired by the $6 Million Man, and then I ended up being able to work on the programs that actually created bionics. And along the way, I was very, very interested in space science, space as a science. And because of a project that was looking at effects of medical radiation on the brain, I got drawn into the space radiation community. And that involved doing some reviewing for the National Space Biomedical Research Institute and NASA. And I had many interesting conversations with them. I actually tried to get funded and found out they would rather have me as a reviewer, which is why they would not fund me. But at round about the time I was doing that, Les came to me and said, hey, we've got this thing going on, Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop, and we need biology. And I said, okay, because I've always been interested. And so one of the things that brings me here is that I want to see humans go out into space, to other planets, to other stars, and I want to make sure we get there sane and cognitively functional and biologically, physiologically functional. And so that's why I'm here.
All right, Les?
I'm originally from eastern Kentucky, small town in East Kentucky called Ashland. And when I was 7 years old, my parents woke me up to watch on a little black and white television Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. And my sister was already interested in the space program, was clipping newspaper articles, and she started talking to me about it. And shortly thereafter, they bought me a novel. I guess I was at that time, I was in elementary school. If anybody's heard of the Perry Rhodan series from way back, it was Perry Rhodan number 33, The Realm of the Triplanets. Not very good science fiction, not very well written, but man, I was hooked. And from that point forward, I started reading everything I could about science fiction. Started watching reruns of the original Star Trek late at night on Friday nights, where my sisters let me stay up with them to watch that. I decided, by golly, I want to be a physicist and work for NASA. So I did. And I was there for several years and realized that there was a gap between the perception of reality for a lot of advanced in-space propulsion and how far technology had matured to enable it. And there were a lot of things that I had reading about in science fiction when I was a kid. So I started proposing new technology projects for spaceflight, things like something called an electrodynamic tether, solar sails, the electric sails that were mentioned. All of those are applicable to interstellar precursors. That got me working to try to make some science fiction things reality in my day job, which is a way cool thing to do. And then the whole interstellar fervor pitch, I think I mentioned this in the history of IRG yesterday, hit with the launching of the 100-year Starship activity well over a decade and a half ago, I guess. And that got us thinking about having a community, a local organization for this called the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. And so I'm here because I'm one of the founders of that. And I want to see it through as long as I'm able. And it looks like, quite frankly, based on what I've seen so far with the new leadership, I think it's in good hands. But that's a topic for another panel.
Bill, I want to backtrack a little bit on and say my association with Bill goes back to the creation of the Jim Baen Memorial Award. When Jim Baen, the founder of Baen Books, passed away in 2006, people wanted to find a way to memorialize his impact on the field and to make sure that the things that he considered important about science fiction didn't just fade away. I think some of that reflected not a lot of trust in me, but that's all right. So we chose, and there were several different competing ideas, but Bill's was the best. And so we created the Jim Baen Memorial Award for science fiction short stories that specifically reflect a positive view of humanity's future in space. Bill was the administrator of this contest for, what, almost 20 years? Almost 20 years. And so I want to congratulate him. He's passing the torch over to Stuart Hardwick, and the contest is continuing. But that's how I know Bill. So why are you here at the IRG?
Well, just let me expand on that just a little bit. One of the co-sponsors of the award is the National Space Society. Some of you are probably familiar with those. And kind of the thing that makes me happy about that contest is the fact that every year we get 100+ entries, and a lot of those stories are written specifically for the contest, and they end up being published all over the place. So it's like it makes me happy knowing that I've triggered people to write stories about the near future of man in space, and they send them out there and get them published. So. But back to the question, like Les, I remember watching Apollo 11 on a tiny little black and white screen, which, I am from Indiana, not that far away from where you were probably at the time. And I've always just been eat up with space. When I found out, back when I was a teenager, I found out that becoming an astronaut, I would probably have to be a fighter pilot first, and my eyesight was way too bad. I talked to recruiters, and it's like, yeah, no, you're not gonna be a pilot. So I ended up doing kind of similar to Les. I ended up working in the aerospace industry, more on the engineering field, not in the physics field, and working on a lot of really interesting projects. I worked for a company some of you may recognize called Beale Aerospace back in the late 90s. That was one of the first attempts of a billionaire attempting to build his own launch system. That was an interesting job. And then I ended up working for Lockheed, and so I worked on the radiator system for the ISS, and went on to do all kinds of other stuff in the aerospace industry. But I'm also a science fiction writer, and the two of those, the science fiction, which has always been there, and the love of aerospace, space and aerospace has always been there, and the two of those have fed each other back and forth throughout my life. And I met Les before the Tennessee Valley Workshop got started, and when he told me about it, it's like, oh, I have to come. even though I might not have much to contribute, I'm going to suck up as much of this information as I can. It's all, for me, it's all research, and it's all enjoyable background information that gets stuck up here, and some of it gets used, some of it doesn't.
So I'd like to do a little informal survey of the audience. How many people who have careers or degrees in STEM topics, in part chose those careers because of fiction that they read or saw? How many? A lot, right? Not everybody, right? But a lot of you. And I think that goes a long way to answering the question, why are science fiction writers at a science conference, right? How do we justify our existence here at this conference? The kind of science fiction that we're talking about, and it's only part of science fiction, is classified as hard science fiction. And one of the reasons why it's called hard science fiction is because it's based on hard science. But it is also famously hard to write. And it's hard to write because we actually care about getting things right. So why is it that you guys who write hard science fiction, that's not all you do, Rob is all over the place, he writes everything, but why when you write hard science fiction, do you go to the trouble of getting it right? Rob, you can take it first.
Well, I really was inspired by a lot of the hard science fiction authors myself. James Hogan always wrote accurate engineers and scientists. And as a part of it is, a lot of my characters end up being scientists or engineers or something, doctors, something to that effect. And I always liked the fact that if I read it in the book and it was real, it existed now, I could go and find a reference to it, and it would be accurate. It would be the same thing that was written, which is what I try to do, and that's why I write hard science fiction. Even writing a zombie apocalypse, I used the same hard science fiction style, which meant I had to go on location to make sure I had all of the locations right. And it's kind of hard to do that in space, but I did it on Earth.
Well, and you also used a simulated space facility. He was forced to do his research in Hawaii. This is a terrible, terrible thing. But he really did write a book set on Hawaii in a zombie apocalypse, so the IRS cannot, in fact, get on him for...
I was forced to actually review the Hawaii space simulation high seas for NASA, and I fundamentally disagreed with how they were running it because they wanted to install a change while the crew was sleeping. And I said, if you're really simulating space flight, no team of gnomes is going to come in and install new monitors on their spacecraft in flight.
So he overrun them with zombies, which is only fair, and the kind of thing you can only do in fiction. But Les, why do you go to the trouble of calculating out transit times and figuring out orbits and all of the stuff that goes into making great hard science fiction?
I guess there are a couple of answers for that all kind of tie together. Is one, I was inspired to be a scientist by reading hard science fiction that was believable. And so I would almost feel like I was betraying my origins if I did otherwise.
True.
And the other side of it is for that next generation of mini-me's out there, I would love for them to read something that I've written that's believable, that inspires them to go into the field to help make it real. And so I would almost feel intellectually dishonest if I didn't. However, and it's good that these books are here because this is really hard science fiction, did a lot of that here. This is more of my first foray into space opera. But even there, when I had the Interstellar star drive, the hand wavium that I did kind of made reference to some things that are kind of on the edge of maybe possible with some speculative physics, because the scientist in me wouldn't let me just create something like the Millennium Falcon in the hyperspace, which doesn't exist and they have no basis for in Star Wars, right? But it's great fun, but I couldn't do that. I would feel like I was kind of betraying myself if I did that. So even when I'm doing something hypothetical like a faster than light drive, there are things on the edge of physics that, you know, we might be able to do that, maybe, if nature does these other things. And so I kind of felt justified as long as I did the hand-wavium in a way that kind of gave acknowledgement to that I wasn't being intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, kind of a lot of the same reasoning. I grew up reading a lot of hard science fiction, but when I started writing it, I think one of the things I thought a lot of fiction that I read that was kind of had a lot of hand-wavium and kind of magic science in it. It just seemed way too easy to me. It's like I kind of liked the restrictions that were put in place by real physics, and having to figure out a way to work around them. And I think that makes for more interesting stories. Now, that said, my books, my series of books that I don't have out here, I do use an anti-gravity device in there. But the thing is, it had very severe restrictions on it, okay? And that goes back to the fact that it's like physics is very restricting in a lot of ways, and I use those restrictions as a way of getting around it being too magical and too easy. So even the things that I use that are not real science, I try to make them restricted in some way so that it seems more like it. So.
Well, this is where science fiction can play, right? We can play at the edge of what we actually know, right? Whether it's the edge of biology or the edge of our understanding of gravity, or you can write about things that we don't have answers to yet, right? And that's part of the fun of it, I think, and that sort of gets to another question for me. And I guess we are a sort of self-selecting bunch, right? We write hard science fiction because it's hard. We're at the Interstellar Research Conference because Interstellar is hard. And these are meaty intellectual things that it's fun to play with, right? And this, I think, is part of our job as publishers of science fiction and writers of science fiction, is to show that it can be fun. And another part of our job, I think, is to show the next generation what it is that we want, right? What do we want to get to? So what have you guys written in your science fiction that we don't have yet, but that we want people to be inspired, like Rob was inspired for bionics, and Les was inspired to work on propulsion and so on. What do you guys have in your books that people should be working towards?
I think for that one, I refer to the Founder Effect. It was a shared world anthology. Les contributed to it. Chris Smith, who's in the audience, contributed to it as well. And the funny thing is, as editor, I don't have a story in that volume because I wrote a wraparound. Because what I wanted to get was the feel of an interstellar colony couple hundred years after it had been founded. Because I look at the myths and legends of the founding of America, and we have Paul Bunyan, we have Sacagawea, we have Lewis and Clark, we have so I've just listed John Henry, a mixture of truth and fable, or truth and legend. So the characters, the people that are going to found a colony are going to do ordinary things that become extraordinary in the telling. So that's what I wanted. I wanted the sense of we've already gotten out there. We've already done this. I want people to think of it in terms of it's not wishful thinking. It's we're going to do this. And what's it going to look like after?
And I think that's part of overcoming the giggle factor, right, that we were talking about, is making it real in the imagination helps to overcome that giggle factor, which we think is an important goal for what it is that we do. Yeah, Les?
I think the answer to that varies depending upon the novel or story that I've worked on.
Yeah.
For instance, in this series, it's an inspiration for why we should have things like SETI and be looking for the other out there, because we might learn something, we might gain some valuable insights into who we are. And so that's kind of my goal, and Travis's goal, as we're writing this series. Whereas for a book that I don't have up here, which was actually my first solo novel, Mission to Metheny, I was really eager to explore the notion of people who are, and the primary character in that book is not neurotypical. And it's based on someone I know very, very well and how they perceive the world, but that they themselves could achieve great things. And so it was a combination science fiction story, and the character had a lot to overcome in the society and how they related to the world to get to where they want to be. So for me, it's often very character-driven or very specific to the novel, what I want to convey. An overarching theme, which I think ties into Baen books in general, is that we can make tomorrow better than today, and despite incredible, terrible things that might happen in our works, I referenced John Ringo, wiping out 90% of the human population, you can still overcome that and have a better future afterward, right? And so I like this idea of trying to instill in people that don't be too pessimistic about today. Every generation has had its problems. We can overcome this. Look at this great future we can have, and this is a step, one possible way to get there.
Well, I guess I'm thinking a little bigger. One of my short stories used basically, I think I called them gate probes, where they were sent at relativistic speeds to different star systems, and once they got there, they used AI and to build a larger gate so that humans could come through. And basically, it was the matter transfer, okay? But it wasn't really matter; it was just data. And so on the other end, I had what I called soup kitchens that contained all of the elements necessary to rebuild a human body. On the other end, and so all that's being sent through is data via these quantumly linked gates. And the thing is, what I liked so much about that is, one, of course, you could jump from planet to planet and things like that. But two, it was saving a template of you so that you could always rebuild yourself at an earlier age or an earlier stage when you had first started using these gates. So it's like, it built in a form of instantaneous travel, and it built in a form of immortality as well. But one of the downsides of that story was the fact that humanity, and this has been discussed here already this weekend, is that humanity basically, we had been spreading, exponentially, we'd been spreading our frontier to all these different worlds throughout our galactic arm, but humans basically lost all interest in it, except of course for my protagonist. He wanted to explore, so.
Well, I think that addresses some of the ideas that were brought forward in our keynote address the first day about the downloading brains and transmitting brains forward, which of course we've discussed in science fiction for a long time. Algis Budger's Rogue Moon popped to mind, and the ethical implications of this. I think we haven't yet fully explored, but it's the Star Trek matter transmitter. What happens to that body when it's disintegrated and potentially reconstituted back someplace else? It's also a good Fermi paradox question. If we can do this, if this is actually real, why haven't we met people who have done this, right? Because presumably there's no limit to the end of copies that you can make. Except potentially that, if all it is data, then then why not? So this is the kind of thing that science fiction should be exploring, and the ethics of it are exactly the kind of thing that we should be exploring in stories, right? We talked about the reason, the hope behind the Jim Baen Memorial Award is humanity's hopeful future in space. There are plenty of people out there who are willing to write about humanity's shitty future in space, or not in space, right? We want to encourage the people who are excited by this, who think that going out into space is something that's exciting, and I think again, this is our job, right? This is our job to do this, because other people are going to write the depressing stuff. So let's show them what the answer is. What we talked about too, and this goes to your story, right? Overcoming alternate reality addiction, right? I mean, we are seeing or virtual reality addiction. We are seeing this right now, right? Why? We have to answer the question, and by we, I mean us here, but all of you guys too. Why, if I can get by on dopamine hits from a really well-designed computer game, should I try to do the hard things? Rob, you have kids. Why?
And you triggered many thoughts along the way. The thing about it is, I'm actually going to go back to Michael Crichton's The Terminal Man.
All right.
And I think that's the perfect example why we need to disconnect. Because in The Terminal Man, we have a character who had a behavioral disorder that was kept under control by electrical stimulation to a particular part of the brain. And the problem that character experienced is and can be a real one. It doesn't have to be, and we have safeguards around it. But instead of it being a way to correct unwanted behavior, that individual started generating the unwanted behavior in order to get the stimulation, which was in itself a feedback. This is what virtual reality can do. And I thought, once again, James Hogan did an excellent job of addressing that in real-time interrupt. And it was very much fun, because the other thing that happened is that the people who had created the virtual reality were using it for advertising and market research, and it devolved. And I think that part of what is actually happening in the video game industry right now is it's being taken over by people who are saying, ooh, what can we find out about our players and use to market the next product? And I think we're seeing that, we always see it in advertising. And when we start getting to the point where the advertising billboard pops up in our vision as we walk past a certain corner or drive past a certain corner, it's time to disconnect when that starts happening.
I mean, that future is here now. I mean, if you let your phone do that, it will do that already. So this is not a science fiction question. This is an existential question for us now. We need the next generation to be excited by these ideas.
Well, in the previous panel about the Fermi paradox, one of my favorite solutions, which portrays, I guess, a bit about my response to the Rorschach tests, is that virtual reality will become more addictive than reality. And I think we're seeing that, as you said, in a lot of different ways, not only with myself on my phone, but the mythical teenager living in the basement playing VR instead of getting a job or dating or anything like that. But I have to say, and this may be a generational thing, and it might just be the way I'm wired, I get a dopamine hit from talking to everybody in this room. And for me, it is much more stimulating dopamine hit than looking at social media. And one of the things I think that has happened when we've come out of the COVID isolation, where a lot of young people, at least in the workforce I was in, came out of that and were told, you got to go back to work. I think a lot of them started experiencing that really for the first time in their adult life, and we're glad they came back. So I don't know, Toni. I think it's vitally important, but I think we're going to have to make conscious effort. I'm not sitting here making a claim that everybody should go back to work and not work virtually. I don't want to get political here. But I'm just saying we should make conscious effort to interact more with each other, because quite frankly, we are communal beings. We are wired for that. And I think most of us get that sense of connection, which is far better face-to-face than I can imagine doing virtually.
Well, I mean, Asimov had this future, which I never thought would come to pass, had this future for us where we were all going to be in our own little homes out in the country somewhere, and we would have all the services we need, and then there was a murder mystery when somebody got murdered in person, right? So, so that was the story. I never thought that was going to be real. I never thought we'd have to convince teenagers to have sex. I mean, you know, we're talking about populations. Once you start to be able to control the means of reproduction, then you can, then populations go below replacement. You know, this is not a future I thought we'd see, but here we are, right? Bill, what are you going to do about it?
Well, probably not much. I think we might see kind of a fragmentation of humanity. Okay, and it's like there's always been. There was. I think they found not too long ago that people who like to know what's on the other side of the hill, that they have this thing called the wandering gene, and it's a small portion of the human population is like 8% or something like that. Okay, but they suspect that those 8% are the ones who have driven exploration and change and things all throughout human history. So I suspect, we've always had, I know people who are just like heavily addicted to sports. They live and breathe and dream about it, okay? And then it's like I know other people who will watch like Matlock, reruns over and over and over again their entire waking life. So it's like, there's already a section of our population who really don't participate in anything beyond their own entertainment. And I think that this is just another version of that. I play video games sometimes in the afternoon. I write in the mornings, and if I have nothing else going on, I'll play video games in the afternoon. And part of me is like, I'm doing nothing productive. But that's okay, I'm retired now. I don't have to do something productive, but I should be writing, or I should be working on something in the garage. But okay, I'm gonna play video games. But so I kind of get the allure and the appeal, but then again, I couldn't do it for all day long like some people I think can. So it may just be that a certain portion of our population is going to do that, and maybe it'll push them out of the way for the other people who want to get something accomplished.
Well, I think that goes to, well, again, one of our speakers on the first day, where we want to have a broad base of support for Interstellar, right? We need to have a broad base of support for Interstellar. It's the chances are good that it's not going to be one mad genius in his basement creating how we get to the stars. Maybe we don't rule that out, right? And that'll be a good science fiction story. But we want that broad support because we want the money for it, we want the employment for it, we want the cultural buy-in for it. So I think, again, as science fiction writers, we have to try to engage as many people as we can in our vision and our answer to why Interstellar. Nobody disagrees with that. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess the question is, how do we do that, right? And I don't think we can leave behind the people who are addicted to the VR, right? We can't. We have to figure out some way to knock them out of it and get them on side.
Well, very likely they can be plugged into the problem-solving systems of our spacecraft.
Yes, and I have to say, actually, one of the Jim Baen Memorial Award finalists, more than one, have used remote actors on Earth as early solar system explorers, right? Running drones, and the Europa guys. This last year, we had I think 2 stories set on Europa. And humans on Europa doing experiments and looking for life and getting into terrible trouble with those with those circumstances. So Europa very much out there in the zeitgeist, at least for the Jim Baen Memorial Award writers. All right, so we saw Les have a moment while he was up here on stage, get an idea for a story. So I will ask all of you, how has the IRG inspired you as writer?
I'm seriously thinking of beaming the Connectome.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to, I think I particular am going to have to do something with that story. Since connectome and memory and everything is part of what I do in my normal everyday research. That hit me as something, yeah, not practical, unless
No,
maybe
no.
if we do this, then maybe we can make it work.
Yeah, I wouldn't let anybody else write that story except you, because most people most people don't understand how little we understand about the brain, but you know, because you've been studying it your whole life, and you know that we are only just now starting to get good data back from the brain, right? so the idea of transmitting X's and O's and getting a brain on the other end is not realistic. So I'm gonna that'll be an interesting until it is, right? All right, until it is. All right, Les. So what was your story idea?
Well, first let me give a little bit of history, because it's happened many times already, in that we've had 4 anthologies of science fiction and science fact that several noted scientists and science fiction writers who have been at these meetings have contributed to. This is but the latest, the Ross 248 project, which Ken Roy, who is unable to be here this weekend, by the way. Ken is one of the founders. He had a health issue come up that kept him from coming. He'll be at the next meeting. He's okay. He just had to recover. And if Ken's watching, we miss you, Ken. We wish you were here. You're here in spirit, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. But these anthologies began with the Going Interstellar anthology, which had a lot of different people contribute to it, both scientists and science fiction writers about interstellar exploration and the leap forward. I co-edited that with the great Jack McDevitt. Then Rob and I had the Stellaris anthology, which was exploring what it means to be human and how will humanity change on long-duration space flight and voyages. And you were in there. Excellent. Yeah. And we had some, biology background and science background to that. And then Rob had the founder effect, which you talked about, which was,
You were in.
and I was in, and was inspired by this meeting. And the last one is, of course, the Ross 248 project, which challenges what I think is perhaps the most underestimated part of discussion of interstellar travel, is what the heck do you do when you arrive and there's no Earth 2.0, and you have a ship full of colonists that have got to survive in another solar system, and you have to either make Earth 2.0 or find a way to live elsewhere. And fortunately, all 4 of these found a home and a publisher with Baen, who's been a strong supporter of what we do. And I think this is a part of our outreach to that mini-me's that are out there. So I think a big part of it has been the inspiration for anthologies that have come out of this. Don't have one yet to pitch from this meeting, but we're open to ideas. And if you have one, I'd love to hear it. But anyway, that's what I want to answer with, is that it's a continuing process that involves all y'all, and in one way or another, with a comment you might make here that leads to a whole collection of stories.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on his name. The guy from Italy that has been yeah, Claudio. Yeah. He did a panel one year about gravitational lensing and how it might be the best way to focus radio signals, from one star system to another, and that's been folded into one of my stories. There's been multiple things that have popped up. That one's the one that comes to mind. But right now, I mean, this time, Al's presentation on the nuclear bomb runway. I'm writing a book right now where this alien civilization, they basically do their own Apollo-style program where they have to develop it from the ground up, and in order to divert an asteroid. So they're using like the Orion nuclear pulse type system. But Al's story is like, well, you can shape these explosions, and it's like, that's what they need to do. I don't know how the physics of that is going to work, but that's what they need to do. So it's like that.
You need to talk to Jeff for that one.
Oh, okay. All right. But yeah, so that needs to find its way into the novel that I'm currently working on. So, it's very fertile ground here.
And I know, from talking to other writers here that we have a first-time writer here who's been really, she's got a million ideas going from this session. And it's going to result in great stories. Well, so I'll turn it around too. How do you guys, as writers, want to inspire the IRG? What do you want to inspire the people who are building the hardware, the fusion drive, the things that we're actually starting to build now? What do you want to see being built next? Les?
Why would you ask me, right? Well, I really, as you all have noticed, I really have a passion for the light sail and the laser-driven light sail. And if I were to make an appeal to the unnamed, whoever it is, billionaire philanthropist who wants to replace Yuri Milner trying to make something happen, I've got other ideas about how we might do that I think we could make a serious progress towards sending that first interstellar probe that would be doable using that tech, because I think it's what is probably the most easily advanceable of the currently seemingly impossible technologies to do that. The second thing I would say is anything in terms of invention, innovation, new way to do business that is comparable in its impact, like SpaceX has been to reduce the price of launch. If we can do something to make it more economically viable, to have a good economic return from beyond Earth orbit, I think that would open and unleash a lot of creativity to expand our presence into space, which is the vision we have. And I'm going to be a little cynical here. This betrays a little bit, again, of my own inkblot test. I think there's nothing that will motivate that like the prospect of greed in making a fortune. And when people realize there's money to be made, we will not be able to withhold people, except by force, from using their creativity to go. And right now, what we're waiting on is that killer app for beyond Earth orbit.
Let's call that the impulse to freedom, shall we? That sounds so much better than greed. So yeah, and then this is something that science fiction writers can think about, right? What is it that out there that we as humans want, right? What is the reason to go do it? Why do we want to go do it, other than that gene that makes us, look? There's John Ringo's latest book is called Beyond the Ranges, right? Because it's that instinct to keep going, to keep looking, to find out, to understand, to know. Describing reasons why we should do that, that's part of our job. Bill?
Okay, I was going to answer the other question.
Yeah, answer the other question, yeah.
No, I want to see infrastructure kind of like developed. I mean, I would like to see like orbital refueling. I want to see rotating habitats that will give us maybe a tenth or a quarter of gravity. I want to see closed ecosystems on ships or stations. All these things that could be necessary to help build a starship in the future. So those are the things that I want to see worked on right now. Back to your point of why to go, that's a tough thing to anybody who's a space advocate, they get asked this question all the time by people who, it's like, oh, we need to spend our money at home, and it's like, yes, but we also need to continue pushing outward. And it's like, to be honest, it's all of our eggs are in one basket at this point. And I personally would like to see the continuation of the human race deep into the future. And I honestly believe that the only way to do that is to spread out to the point where one bad natural disaster isn't going to wipe us out entirely. So.
Or one bad engineering disaster. Right?
Or yeah.
I've got a different answer why to go.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems we have in the human body is rehabilitation and recovery from a serious injury. The hardest thing to teach a person to do is to relearn how to walk, because of the fact that their bones and their muscles cannot withstand the stress and strain of their own body weight after a recovery that requires multiple pins and joint replacements and torn muscles have to be stitched back together, or even the pressure of a stump in a prosthetic. Why in the heck are we not taking people up out of a 1G field and letting them start the rehab in a partial G field and then bring them back to relearn the rest of the job in 1G? I did not realize it while he was still here, but Michael Nyack had posed a question: what would make the moon economically feasible for a return mission? And he asked that question of a group that some of us are involved in called Sigma. And I sent in the answer: rehabilitation hospitals on the moon. And we never really got a response to that, but it's, okay, that's a reason. Maybe that's not why go interstellar, but it certainly is, why are we not in space when we could be doing this? Why don't we have hospital facilities where we could be not having to worry about the effects of gravity on our circulatory system while we're doing a repair or a rehabilitation? Why are we not taking advantage of being able to grow crystals? And actually, the 3D printing of biological tissues is a heck of a lot easier when you don't have a 1G field around it. So there are things like that in terms of why go, because it makes so much stuff easier.
If we have medical tourism, and if we have space tourism, why can't we have medical space tourism? Yes, I like that. We should spend our money that way. So, all right, I think the one last thing to get back to the making the argument for why interstellar, and that goes back again to that Fermi paradox question. What if we really are alone? What if we are it? How do we need to make that argument that it's going to be a good thing for us to keep on going? Les?
I can start because this riffs off what I said last night.
Yeah.
You know, if in fact we are alone, or alone right now, I don't know about you, but that makes me feel like I have an incredible responsibility to make sure we don't screw it up, right? Yep. And I look around the world today and all the conflicts and the things that we disagree about, whether they be in our own internal politics or international geopolitical affairs. And in the scheme of the universe and life in the universe, all of that, quite frankly, seems somewhat petty in terms of the survival of life on the planet and the prospering of the intelligent life that we are and all that. So I for one, it goes back to my moral imperative that I argued last night, gets even stronger if we are come to suspect that we're it. Oh my gosh, we have a responsibility to spread it as far and wide as we can to make sure it survives and thrives, because life is good. And I think that slogan says it all right there.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, if we are the only intelligence in the universe, then it was some spectacular accident that caused this, okay? The chances are it may never happen again. I mean, so like Les said, I mean, we have a responsibility. I mean, you know, this amazing thing that has happened. It's like, are we just going to let it, you know, sputter out and die, or are we going to, you know, see how far we can push it and see how far we can develop as an intelligent race, I guess. You know, we can accomplish great things if we don't wipe ourselves out in the process. So, yeah, I agree. I think we have kind of like a responsibility to keep pushing and see how far we can go.
I have very eclectic musical tastes, and there's a group, Nightwish has an album called Endless Forms and Most Beautiful, and it's based on the writings of Darwin, and it has some readings by Richard Dawkins, and at the tail end of it, there's a piece that's going on about how humanity comes and humanity goes, and the world lives on. And for something that's supposed to be atheistic, it's awfully Gaianistic. And I have commented many times to friends that listen to this that I don't believe it, I don't like it, because there's a quote, how much nobler to have lived and died than never to have lived at all. And I'm going, no. How much nobler to have lived and left a mark and a trail and a guide to continue to go, to grow, to expand, and to go out there and find out what's next. That is what is noble about our existence.
There we go. All right, I'm going to close on that. So, shall we open this up for questions? Yes? Yeah? Guys? Yes? Anybody have story ideas that they'd like somebody to write? Yep.
Are there any genres of science fiction that you think are detrimental to space exploration?
All right, so I think there are individual authors who commit crimes against science fiction. But no, I don't think there are any genres that are inherently bad for the cause, right? I think any form of science fiction is inherently hopeful because you're positing future, right? You're assuming we are going to have a future, that we're not going to get knocked out by, the sweet meteor of death, and we're not going to get some sort of great goo cascade that destroys all life in the universe, right? So I think I think there are some forms of science fiction that are less useful for our purpose, but that doesn't make them less valid.
Even when an author,
sorry.
Even when an author gets it wrong, they trigger the conversation about what would be correct. And I think that in and of itself is valuable as well.
We just did a recent episode of the Baen podcast, and I was chastised resoundingly by everyone else on the panel for suggesting that dystopian literature is doing harm, because I think, and I now realize, based on the feedback I got when they were eviscerating me online, is that even that gives us an indication of what we don't want, right? But I think when I read stories that imply, and this is broader than just science fiction, I think it's the crime against literature in general, that has a very dystopian view of we're just, automatons guided by chemistry and raw emotion and everything else, and there's no purpose behind it all. I think that that does detriment to the people who read it and internalize that. Because whether you're a theist or an atheist, what we have around us can do great good and is worth preserving and moving forward. And I think writers who are nihilistic and basically tell you that life is meaningless, of which there was a whole genre of that following World War I, right? I think that does a disservice to the culture, personal opinion.
Yeah, my first thought was like post-apocalyptic fiction, but to be honest, I'm a big fan of post-apocalyptic fiction. I've read a lot of it over the years. But the thing is, for me, it has just the opposite effect. Kind of like has been mentioned, it's like it makes me think, we could lose the ability to go to the stars very easily, and here are all the scenarios in which that could happen, and stop us. Draw us up short and stop us dead in our tracks of advancement. So that's kind of has that effect on me.
Yeah, your last topics that you were addressing right before we went to the Q&A reminded me of a question that kind of arose in my mind during the Fermi Paradox panel as well. A lot of science fiction comes with the trope of us existing and combating against the ancients, but it's sort of crept into my mind at one point, and I've never crunched the numbers, but it's like, what if we are the ancients, and what could come after?
Well, Les, you want to take this one? Because you've kind of written some of that.
I go back to my same theme. I think that gives us an incredible responsibility, right? In terms of, make sure that's not a bomb coming in. Is the ship land? They're finally here. I think it comes with a lot of responsibility because I've always viewed when I've looked at and read science fiction stories that have the elder race or the ancient ones that disappeared and all you find are the remains on the planet, like in the City on the Edge of Forever, the Guardians. You wonder what happened to them and why, right? And it just seems to me that with that comes this notion of if we are the elder race, we better do it right. Because if there are going to be other races and civilizations that emerge, we don't want to be the ones that view them as amoebas and smack them down, right? We've got to be cognizant of that as we move forward, and whether we're capable of that, I don't know. But that's my thought.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like having, being an adult and having children. I mean, it's like if we are able to advance to the point where we've overcome all of these big problems that are thrown in, stumbling blocks in our evolution and our development. If we're able to someday overcome those and get to this elder race platform, then we can kind of help other races that are coming up behind us to avoid some of the mistakes that we were lucky enough to avoid, and just like an adult, trying to teach a child, it's like, yeah, don't stick your finger in that fire. Don't do that,
We did that. It hurts, right? Yeah, we did that. It hurts, yeah. And I think, again, thinking big, right? The more of us, the more humans that get out there, the more different ways we get out, the more different directions that we go, the more likely we are to get it right. The more chances we are to have a chance to get it right. And again, convincing the public that this is a useful thing to do is part of our job. Just one quick anecdote on that too. We were trying to sell a science fiction property to the movies, and it was essentially emergency on the moon, right? It was going to be EMTs on the moon. And it was hard science fiction. We had it all thought out, and hard science fiction writers and military SF writers, and it was going to be great. And it was rejected by Hollywood because it wasn't science fiction, right? They had already accepted that we were going to return to the moon. And I'm like, part of me is sad because my project got rejected, but part of me is great. You're right. It shouldn't be science fiction, right? This is exactly where we're going. And I want that for Interstellar too, right? Yeah.
So I'm a child of the Apollo days. 5 years old when they landed on the moon, stayed up all night to go watch the thing on a black and white TV, CRT TV, not a flat screen. And then throughout most of my life, we've spent about 50 years, and since then, 55 years to be exact, not really going back to the moon, just staying in low Earth orbit. Now we've got commercial enterprises talking about that. There's a younger generation that's aching for inspiration for that. The Gosh Wow Sense of Wonder, Tom Swift books, Robert Heinlein books, the juveniles that he was writing. I think that needs to be as much a consideration of a target audience, if nothing else, to peel them away from unicorns, zombies, and vampires. Inspire the harder sciences, inspire the investigation. The Edmund Hillary, why do you climb the mountain? Because it's there. That's the word adventure. It's not really a question, it's more of a statement. It's a cry out for, let's bring up some realism in the literature to the young folks today who gave the presentations. We need more of them. How do we get more of them?
Well, I think part of that is where we are in the cycle of scientific discovery, right? It's very hard for individuals to do things that are cool in a lot of the science that we do, right? We're all picking away at little teeny tiny problems that contribute to a greater whole. But the individual glory, the individual fun that you get from solving a very hard problem is hard to do with big science. And that's hard to overcome, but we can show them a future where individuals can do things and can solve problems, and we can show the absolute satisfaction that you get from gnawing away at a hard problem and solving it. Yes? Yeah?
So we do have a bit of a problem in our public funding of science, because public funding of science has concentrated on increments. And so I have a number of colleagues whose grand contribution is, I'm looking at this one molecule that's associated with a single receptor that is only on a particular type of cells that may or may not have something to do with drug abuse. And as Toni and I well know, yes, single molecules do matter, but we have a tendency to encourage our scientists to focus on the microscopic and even the nanoscopic. And for those of us who have one foot in the scientific and one foot in the clinical field, we often forget what we're doing this for. I'm now in an institute whose mission statement talks about creating cures. And it is a major difference. And so when it comes to inspiring Interstellar, we have to say, yes, we need the increments, but sometimes we're going to have to make that bold leap and fail, which is another thing that our current environment of research funding does not tolerate. It doesn't tolerate failure, and yet we are currently watching a private space enterprise that says, yeah, okay, we had a rapid unscheduled disassembly. Next launch, we'll do it differently to make sure we don't do it that way. And I think that's something we have lost as a society, or not, maybe not lost, but we need to ensure that the next generation understands that failure is an option as long as you learn from it.
To respond to your specific request about writing, juvenile science fiction or that kind of thing, I think there are a lot of people who are writing that. I think the challenge is getting it into the hands of the young people to read it, right? And so I don't know how to solve that problem so much, except we all can be communicators. And I mentioned in my solar sail talk, I went back to my elementary school and talked to a bunch of these kids. I could see the light bulb go off on a few of those kids, right? And I'm hoping some of them started picking up and got addicted to science fiction to carry that forward. And so I think in this highly personalized communication culture we live in, where you live in your own social media bubble, et cetera, we're going to have to learn how to communicate that, to get the people who might be reader interested to become readers, or the parents that are reader interested to find the works to give to their children. And that is a different way to reach than I think many of us of our generation, if you look at our demographic up here, are having, is we don't know how to do that effectively. And that's where I need input from other generations.
Well, I think a positive signal here is we're talking about the number of viewers on your YouTube video, and it was a NIAC's YouTube video that are in them, over 500,000, right? Hundreds, yes, right, yeah.
I was stunned. I gave a lecture to the Royal Institution about interstellar travel, basically what I gave last night. And when I heard yesterday Andrew Higgins talk about how many hits he had, how he views, I thought, well, I wonder how many views that had. It was over 500,000. I had no idea until I looked yesterday. And so there are people who are interested. It's just a matter of we got to find a way to not just get them interested, but hook them, right? And so I'm sorry to grab that away, but I was thrilled. I had no clue until last night.
So yeah, I see that as a positive sign, right? That space and big space are things that people are in fact interested in. It goes across country lines. It goes across political lines. This is something that people are interested in, and we can be part of spreading that information.
Yeah, and of course we are focused on printed books or written books. But the thing is, it's like science fiction has pretty much become ubiquitous in our society now. I mean, back when I was in like high school, it's like, you know, your options for indulging in science fiction were few. I mean, there was a little bit on TV. There was quite a few books if you could hunt them down. But now it's everywhere. I mean, you know, and the thing is, it's like even I mean, we still have something to contribute, because a lot of times the books that my, you know, none of mine, but a lot of the books that my contemporaries write end up being adapted for TV or video games, and then they are consumed by the people who don't read necessarily. So, you know, it still all kind of percolates down to the same thing.
More questions?
First, a comment on what Rob had said. Yeah, the bulk of science and research funding is kind of incremental, but there's rays of hope. There's DARPA, ARPA, X Prizes, NIAC, those kinds of things. And it's great fun to work those areas because they do allow you to fail too, which is very important for learning. So yeah, we need more of that. Maybe we need some heroes and stories from that line of that area on a popular X-Men movie or something. A technique question for the panel, because I'm always fascinated by writers. I'm a terrible writer, but I admire people who can write. What's your thought process for deviating from known science from a plot perspective and from a science perspective?
From an editorial perspective, I want the author to know where that difference is, right? I want them to know what the line is. And that's why I like to work with authors who themselves are scientists and engineers and involved in the creation of technology. But I don't know how the sausage is made either, so you tell me.
Well, when I was reading, the entries for the Jim Baen Memorial Contest, if somebody did something that was pretty much against the rules of physics, if they explained why they did it and how that change came about, then I knew that they had at least considered it, and they knew that it was a violation of the rules of physics. So that goes a long way. I mean, when you have a science fiction writer who knows that they've messed up, or they know that it's not real, but they're addressing it in some way, you know, even if that addressing is hand-wavium, you know, like my, null gravity machine, then you can kind of get away with it a lot easier, I think, so.
Wow. For me, ultimately, science fiction is not the science. Science fiction is the fiction and the plot and the character and where you want to take the narrative. And oftentimes that dictates how you deal with whether you can do it within the realm of what is possible and known and an extrapolation of what we have today, or whether you have to have some kind of breakthrough that you have to explain, as Bill just said, to make sure that you're intellectually honest with yourself, like I said earlier. And again, I've explored that in many books. This begins kind of near term, becomes Interstellar, but is plot-driven wise. And our person who's going to be talking tomorrow about relativistic impacts of civilizations, relativistic travel speeds make a big difference in a love story that unfolds in this book. Whereas in this book, it was plot-driven, and I had to do the little bit of hand-wavium because I wanted to have, you know, very arching, very long distances, and also kind of a deep time play around with a bit. But it was very plot-driven, and so I don't ever want to forget the narrative, the story arc, and the plot and the story I want to tell. And the science fiction just is providing the backdrop for that. And so the deviations, to come from your question, just really depend upon the individual circumstance of the book and where the plot has to go to move forward.
So y'all received a copy of The Moon in the Desert in your bag. I started from the premise of $6 Million Man and Martin Caden's Cyborg. 1972 for the novel, 1974 for the TV movies and TV show. And there were a number of things that were being done that were highly speculative that we now know can't be done. Of course, it violated biology all over the place. But I used as my starting point the actual real science. DARPA's Revolutionizing Prosthetics program was initiated by a very good friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Ling, Colonel Jeffrey Ling of the U.S. Army. And I gave him a copy of it, and he loved it because I tried to stay true to the real science. But there's one thing that I did. We don't have a power supply. And so I just left it out. I didn't even bother trying to hand wave, so I didn't deviate. Because, as I said before, I like the fact that if it exists and somebody could look it up, they're going to find the same thing on their expert sources of how it works, and what it's constituted is what I use in my books. And I have a fantastical space drive in there that in a sequel will allow us a 2-week journey to Mars.
I want it.
It came out of the Wichita IRG meeting and was called Helicity 2, which was an ion drive with a fusion afterburner. And the specific impulse that drive, they said now the first implementations of the drive wouldn't be able to get there. I mean, they were talking about 1/10 G maximum. And so I did some of the back of the envelope calculations and I extended it. But my hand waving was based on something that was actually presented at IRG as a potential product. So again, there's a couple of things. When I depart from the reality, I'm trying to make it an extension of what we've got right now, as opposed to just pulling it out of thin air. But sometimes you do. If your character, if making the character arc work requires you to pull it out of thin air, well, it's fiction.
I have a question. In terms of treatment from a story perspective, it relates to the conversation we had this morning about how we're seeing a lot of, you could call it junk science, but basically, in that case, it was using AI to create papers that you couldn't properly assess the relevancy to it. But it even goes deeper than that, because we're starting to see in terms of science a lot of just stuff that is just, people, the process seems to be falling apart. It may even be broken. It seems to me this might be an interesting area to explore, because it represents an existential crisis for humanity if we can't trust basic science to police itself and to provide us with meaningful information about the nature of the world around us.
Well, I mean, it goes to a classic problem, for astronomy, right? This is a signal to noise problem, right? And this is science, right? We don't trust anything. We test things. It's getting harder and harder to rely on your gut. But humans are very good at developing bullshit detectors. We're just going to have to nurture that bullshit detector factor. But it's certainly the kind of thing that science fiction, the kind of problem that science fiction should be addressing, right? How do we get solutions to this overwhelming flood of nonsense out there, interfering with our actual understanding of reality.
So to give a little more context, this is a conversation that we were having at breakfast. And I was mentioning the fact that I am an associate editor for a scientific journal, and as such, I have to handle the junk papers coming in. And I have the highest reject rate of anybody on the editorial board, including the editor-in-chief, because he just throws the stuff at me, and because he knows that I'm going to have my bullshit detector running. And now you've given me an idea for my next story, which is actually going to be in a future society where they're having to try and figure out what is coming from reality in real science and what is not. Because we are flooded with junk. And we have a generation of students who think that copying Wikipedia articles into their test is answering a question. And I'm not kidding. I had a student do this. Or who think that having the AI write. Now, we're seeing an awful lot of AI usage, or large language model, to be perfectly honest, in translating papers, because English is the language of scientific publication. And there are translation programs that are designed to translate. And I can usually tell the difference, but when I see a paper and I run my AI detection on it, and that AI has written the section that has the references in it, I reject, because I now have to validate every single reference that was in that section, and that's not my job. And we have 2 countries that are very bad about sending fake papers because of paper mills. And it's all coming from, I would say that 99% of what crosses my desk is from 2 countries. And so one of the things that we, those of us here and here, have to do is to make sure that we're always on top. We have to be the ones innovating. We have to be the ones encouraging. We have to be the ones writing. We have to and take a problem and make multiple stories as our plot line and push it to Hollywood and see if we can't get them to publish a story. It'll have to be a romance, I'm sure, but maybe we can make it a Hallmark Christmas movie about the poor, lonely scientific editor who's on a crusade against fake research, and she goes back to her hometown where there's this guy doing research in his basement, and he's found out the truth and he can't publish it because of the paper mills. I think that's our next story.
I just, for a science fiction panel, Toni, you mentioned, teenagers having sex or not, right? The reproducibility problem is bigger than that, and it's in science. And if you haven't heard about this lately, the reproducibility problem is huge in terms of people publishing papers and then people going back and duplicating their methods and not able to reproduce the results, right? And I don't want to belabor that here, but there's a great episode, 2-part episode on Freakonomics Radio. And if you've never listened to that podcast, go find it if you want to find out how bad this is, and in an entertaining but very insightful way. They did a 2-part expose on the academic reproducibility problem. And I just think it's interesting as science fiction writers, I, for one, began my career relying on results of peer-reviewed papers and could look at that and immediately, when I started writing, maybe incorporate some of that into my writing. But now, and this is what I use AI for, in large part, is, okay, here's this paper. Is there external validation of this? Because it's a little bit on the edge for me, and I'd like to find other references that might affirm or not. And I do that in my day job and in my science fiction writing. So AI can be a very useful tool if it's used for a tool for things like that, as opposed to creating the junk science to begin with. But I think we have to be careful, because a lot of people who write science fiction are not necessarily practicing scientists or engineers, and they're going to read things that they just accept as, oh, if it's published in this journal, it must be true. That is not necessarily the case anymore.
The Gell-Mann amnesia effect, which is a scientist reads an article and they say, that's not right. They flip the page, they read another article that's not in their field, and they go, yeah, okay, that looks right. Yeah. And by the way, did you intend that pun or not?
Which one? The reproducibility? Yes, I did.
Okay.
It just occurs to me that applying that idea to the Fermi paradox, right? Maybe the reason why we're not seeing advanced civilization signals is because we're being flooded by crap on purpose, right? And if we had the proper filter, when we get the proper filter, suddenly the universe will be populated. So, you like that? Yeah. Somebody write it. I'm not a writer. So, all right. Other questions?
Hi.
Hey, Heather.
I am going to take my Baen hat off for a minute because I also volunteer at a very small library. We are so small we can't afford to be part of Overdrive. So if you listen to audiobooks, you don't see any of our books. I am being inundated with homeschool moms right now that have kids in elementary and middle school saying, my kid is interested in STEM, I'm interested in them reading science fiction, what do you got for me? And I say, well, Baen starts with YA. So I am actually looking for recommendations for elementary and middle school science stuff, or science fiction specifically, that I can throw at these kids because we just got a grant and we can buy some books and I have no idea what to advise my librarian on. And I would love it, kind of going back to that, helping to inspire both STEM and other kinds of science in the future.
Well, one of the things that Baen does is we do have study guides for many of our books that are extensive, written by grad students and teachers that are intended for homeschoolers, among others, to use science fiction to teach various subjects. And that can be history, it can be STEM, it can be biology, it can be ethics. So we have a bunch of those, and they're available free at Baen.com. Baen also has a list of suitable for YA titles, right? We don't publish for kids particularly, but we do publish for ourselves when we were 12 to 14, right? So that's one place to start, but other more specific recommendations. And younger, all right. So all right. So Baen is going to take care of your older kids, the middle grade kids. How about those suggestions?
Suggestions, I have no idea other than some that I've read that are the YA under Baen, but I don't go into bookstores and look for the young reader section. But I will tell you, from science education point of view, in homeschools, I've done a lot of communicating to kids in that way and to college students, trying to encourage, in particular, people who have a Christian faith or religious faith, that it's okay to go into the sciences. And I would like to see more both science fiction to inspire and also really good, credible science young person textbooks that are out there. So, I think that there's a broad need for that. But again, that's a whole other branch of discussion that we could go into here. But I think there is a strong need for that.
All right, I'm going to say, anybody who has suggestions for Heather, just send them to info@baen.com. Would you have an email? All right, so you can send it to heather@baen.com and just send her suggestions for middle grade and YA science fiction. Yep, good. Everybody good on that? Yes? All right. More questions? No, I think that's a great place to wrap this up. Let's inspire the next generation. Yeah.